All right, AP Human Geography classes. Here's our third video on religion, and we're going to focus on why do religions organize space in distinctive patterns. And there's three big reasons. Let's go to the first one. Places of worship, right? You can also call this anchors of worship, and this is where adherents of various religions come to practice, well, their religion. Let's start with Christianity, all right? Christians worship typically in a church. Now, it's interesting to note that the church usually was the tallest and largest building in, let's say, a town or a large city. It was also usually placed at the center of a town. Now, the architecture depends on the denomination in which one practices within the Christianity religion, and we'll talk more about that in class. Also, depending on where a church is built around the world, well, the availability of resources also affects the style of the church. We'll talk more about that in class. Let's focus on Islam. Muslims worship in mosques. Now, mosques are not viewed as holy places like Christians view churches, but rather this is where a community gathers just to worship in general. And mosques are really only found in large cities. They're not really found in small towns like churches are. All right, let's focus on Hinduism. Hindus practice their religion in temples. Now, let me note something real quick here. Asian ethnic and universalizing religions usually do not build large structures such as mosques or churches, but rather they have small shrines, or if they do have some sort of temple, it's dedicated to one god. Now, if you look to the right here, this picture, it's a very small piece of furniture that can actually be put in somebody's home. And again, these temples, well, they're found usually in just a person's home, and they are dedicated to a particular god. Another reason why religions organize space in distinctive patterns is because of the way they dispose the dead. Now, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, well, they usually bury their dead in a cemetery. It's interesting because this practice came about due to Christians burying their religious partners in catacombs in Rome because it was illegal to practice the Christian religion as well as burial. Now, here are some problems with cemeteries. There's competition for scarce land in many communities. In China, for example, about 10% of the land is covered by cemeteries, which could be used for agriculture. Now, cemeteries, again, do take up large amounts of land. So what's the solution to this problem? Well, quite frankly, there's other methods of disposing of the dead. One particular one is cremation. And this is derived from nomadic tribes that instead of just leaving the dead out in the open for, let's say, scavengers, they burn them instead to get rid of them. Now, Hindus generally practice cremation over burial due to land space. Now, interesting enough, just because they're saving the land doesn't mean it doesn't put pressure on something else. In fact, it puts pressure on India's wood supply. And cremation, to note, was one of the most common ways of disposing bodies before Christianity in Europe. So there is a history of cremation. There are two other ways to dispose bodies, two that are not as popular as cremation or burial. One is exposure, and this is used by Zoroastrians, Tibetan Buddhists. Now, what they do is they would leave the body out in the open, and scavenging animals, would be exposed to the dead in order to not contaminate the earth of the living. So they didn't want to bury the dead to contaminate the land. Also, there's something called sea burials. Now, bodies of people would be thrown or pushed into the sea on a boat depending on the class. So if you're the lower class, you were thrown into the ocean. If you were, let's say, a king or royalty or an upper class, you were actually put on a raft or a boat, sent out to sea, and your body would float throughout the ocean. All right, also another way religions organize space in distinctive patterns is there's famous religious settlements where they literally go to a specific location. These are also called utopian settlements because they're built around religious ways. Two perfect examples. One, near us, is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which are founded by the Moravian Christians from the Czech Republic. This entire town was built on the values of Moravian Christians. Another famous example is Salt Lake City, Utah, which was founded by the Mormons. If you take a look at the right here, you can see their church being built in about the late 1800s. Now, this whole city, again, is founded on their religious ways. Maybe not so prominent anymore because many of these settlements have been disappearing, and the big factor is due to the lack of settlement by outsiders and immigrants. Again, if you don't practice that religion, chances are you're not going to settle in a place like that. Last one, and we're going to talk about religious hierarchy and autonomy. Real quick here, just to focus on something. The Christian religion, specifically Roman Catholicism, there is a hierarchy within the religion. So the highest position is a pope, the second are bishops, third is bishops, and the fourth are priests. Right? Even Mormons have a hierarchy where they have the board and the president. These are then controlled by wards, and wards are usually contained of 750 Mormon people within a given area. Now, that is a very structurized hierarchy. There are also local autonomy or localized structures. So the three religions that use this type are Islam, which there, again, is no hierarchy or formal organization like, say, in Roman Catholicism or Mormons. Instead, they're based around local mosques, so mosques help attribute and control local Muslims. Judaism and Hinduism, very similar. There's no centralized structure of religious control. In fact, most Hindus just worship alone or within their own household, like we said about the Hindu temples earlier. All right, that was it. Quick rundown on why religions organize space in distinctive patterns. We'll talk more about this in class. I'll see you then.